Now, I've addressed this in a previous video about the Black Dahlia that you can find on my channel, but because this still seems to be going around, this desire for Brian De Palma to release his 3-hour version of the Black Dahlia, the 2006 movie, based on the James Ellroy novel from the same series as LA Confidential. It was released as a 2-hour and 2-minute film. And the reason why there's this idea that there's a 3-hour version that was butchered by the studio is because, among maybe other reasons, James Ellroy himself claimed at the time that the movie was coming out that he had seen De Palma's 3-hour version and that it was great. Ever since then, it's been like written in stone that there's a 3-hour version of the Black Dahlia. And even I was caught up in all this. I'm like, man, yes, they should release, I even signed a petition that you can find online that Universal release a 3-hour version of the Black Dahlia, and for many, the Black Dahlia is kind of a flawed movie. It's got a lot of good stuff in it, but for many, they found it confusing. They found there's a lot of stuff in it. It's very dense. The novel is very dense, and so it's all sort of a dense storyline, but released as a 2-hour and 2-minute film. And in many ways, that kind of that anticipation that there was a whole hour cut out and that someday we'll see that hour, I think in many ways has kept us from enjoying the actual movie that came out. But one day, as I'm watching for like the third or fourth time the official release or the official video of the Black Dahlia, which I have on Blu-ray, I'm watching it and I'm wondering what that hour could have added, really. Like, what are we talking about here? I mean, as I watched the movie, I'm not sure if adding scenes would have made the film better or worse. Maybe they could add a little bit more to one scene, a little bit more to another scene, a little bit more to another scene, and maybe that can make for as enjoyable or more enjoyable a film. But for the most part, I couldn't understand. I mean, an hour's worth of film, that's a lot of storyline, that's a lot of plot details, characterizations, whatever. And I started to think, I've never heard De Palma himself say that the studio butchered his films or butchered the Black Dahlia, or that, he had a longer version. And he's usually pretty honest about that. He's talked about the ending of Snake Eyes and how he had to make changes there and he wasn't real happy about it, and prefers the original ending. He's talked about, re-editing Raising Cain. Even he's talked about Casualties of War and a couple of edits here. There's a director's cut out there where he added a few more scenes. Never talked about the Black Dahlia or any scenes that could have been added or anything like that. And again, watching the movie, I suspected there wasn't really much more to add. So I really started to do some research. Not to brag, but I used to be pretty good at that. I was an intelligence analyst in the Army, which required, one of the jobs that I did was, research. I mean, if you look hard enough, you can find some pretty strong evidence to the contrary. My conclusion is there was never a 3-hour version of the Black Dahlia. Now, I know this now because of 2 interviews, both of which were done by the now by the website De Palma a la Mode. which now no longer exists. It was an Angel Fire website. Angel Fire is now done. It's dead. So anything that was a website from Angel Fire, it's gone. Unless you've backed up, the files or what have you, and you can turn it into a new website. But it's over, and it had decades worth of great material. So thankfully, I found these interviews before the website ended. But there's an interview with Brian De Palma, and there's an interview with the film's composer, Mark Isham. And I will go into that in just a second. But yes, there's a history of the Black Dahlia. When it was first being conceived as a film, it was going to be turned into a miniseries. David Fincher was going to direct the miniseries, which, yes, would have been probably a very accurate depiction of the novel, because you had a lot to work with, right? You have several days of viewings. You can go into great detail. But for whatever reason, that didn't work out. David Fincher left the production, and Universal, I guess, wanted it to be a movie. And they hire Brian De Palma to direct the movie. And I mean, that just sounds great, right? A James Ellroy crime drama, a prequel to LA Confidential for all intents and purposes. It's about the Black Dahlia murder, and Brian De Palma, a great crime director, is going to head it. So I get why people think that there was a 3-hour version out there, especially if it's going to be, especially if the writer, James Ellroy, claimed that there was one out there. But in the interview with Brian De Palma, from De Palma a la mode, he said that the original, because he was asked, was there a much longer version of the film, of the script from the film? And he said the first script he ever got, the original script for the Black Dahlia, was at most 2 hours and 20 minutes long. And so before they even started shooting, they cut some of those minutes off. And then as they were shooting, they either decided not to shoot certain scenes, or they did shoot them, but they just decided to cut them out. All at De Palma's discretion. Now, he has no reason to lie about this. Especially years later, if you watch the De Palma documentary, he goes into any cuts, any edits that he didn't like that were done by the studio or demanded from the studio. He'll go into all that. And that De Palma documentary, the Noah Baumbach, Paltrow, documentary that was back in, I think, 2015, whenever it came out. That documentary was years after the Black Dahlia. He could have easily, De Palma, easily have said, yeah, studio demanded I cut an hour's worth of stuff. Never says that. Doesn't even allude to any editing issues with the movie by the studio. So, anyway, in this interview, he says that the original script's 2 hours and 20 minutes. Some of the scenes he cut. Yes, there was a character based on a real-life guy, loosely based on a real-life guy, Red Manning. I think they did shoot an interrogation scene with him, and it's one of the longer scenes that they decided to cut. And that was followed by, apparently, if I can remember rightly, because again, unfortunately the website where this interview happened is no longer with us, so I can only go by my memory. But I think there was a montage of other interrogation scenes, a montage of interrogations where they're interrogating false witnesses or people who falsely claim that they're the suspect, whatever. But it's all a red herring. And the reason why De Palma cut those scenes out is because there's so many other characters in this movie. And the movie is also concentrating on other things besides the Black Dahlia murder. Really, the movie is about Bucky, the lead, the lead character in the film, who's a detective involved in not just trying to investigate the murder of Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, but it's about his relationship with his partner, his relationship with Kay, his partner's, girlfriend, and it's about Bucky's relationship with a girl he's very interested in romantically, in Madeline, who also might be a suspect. And so there's a lot going on, and there's other little subplots here and there, which is why sometimes the movie is a little confusing. So in De Palma's eyes, to put Red Manning in there and to put some of these other interrogation scenes in there, it was too much. Like it's much ado about nothing. Like you're putting all these interrogation scenes and none of these people being interrogated really have anything to do with the investigation, or they, even if they're suspects, they're not taken very seriously. So he just said, the movie can't afford to do this. It doesn't need any more confusion. It doesn't need any more distractions. And so he edited those scenes out. And he already mentions earlier in the movie anyway, the chief detective of the investigation, played by Mike Starr. He already alludes to the fact that there are a bunch of people who are confessing to the crime who are false confessors. They have nothing to do with it. So why have an interrogation montage of these people who are claiming to be the killer when they're not? So another scene that was not cut, but he decided not to include is a neighbor of the family, the Linscott family. Without going into too much detail, it's basically Madeline's family. Madeline, played by Hilary Swank. They're the Linscotts. And so Bucky, I guess, there's a scene where Bucky and maybe Bucky and Lee, but I think maybe just Bucky. Anyway, I don't know. But it's a scene in the book where they visit a neighbor. The neighbor has a painting of the laughing clown. And that's supposed to, and the neighbor is supposed to say that she got that painting from an auction where she bought it from the neighbors, the Linscott neighbors. And De Palma was going to cast his good friend Amy Irving, whom he obviously has known since he cast her in Carrie, and he was going to have her come to Bulgaria to film, that one scene, at this neighbor's house. Now this has to be the most heartbreaking cut or omission that De Palma made in the Black Dahlia, because Amy Irving's a friend and he hadn't worked with her in a while, and I'm sure he was looking forward to working with her at that moment, but he just decided, cut out the middleman. Why not just have Bucky's going to be at the Linscott's house anyway. Why not have the portrait of the laughing clown in their mansion instead of some neighbor's mansion? Just eliminate the more difficult, eliminate anything that might be confusing. Because frankly, the movie, the story, I keep saying the movie, it's really the story is confusing. Mostly it's pretty faithful to the story. And all the confusing bits are actually confusing bits in the novel too. So yeah, he decides to not even allow Amy Irving to, or not even have her get on a plane to waste her time over there. In his mind, he has to now try to explain why Bucky is even going to the neighbor's house in the first place. They have to go into exposition as to how she got the painting. Why bother when the painting can just be in the Linscott's house? And boom, the conclusions can be drawn just by that. And the painting is kind of a big deal for the mystery. So when it's all said and done, I think the only other, there might have been some small edits here and there where maybe a nightclub scene was a little bit longer or what have you. But other than that, that's it. That's what he cut or didn't even bother to shoot in the first place. Oh, I'm sorry. There's another scene. Again, it's all up here. I am getting older, and sometimes you forget things. But there was another scene where they revisit the dad, the father of the victim, Elizabeth Short. So Mr. Short. They go back to him. They ask him a few more questions, and his other daughter, Elizabeth Short's younger sister, is reading some magazine, and there's supposed to be some clue in the magazine, and so there's a scene there that I don't know if they actually shot it and cut it, or if they never shot it at all, but that's supposed to be in there too. So all that apparently was going to add up to about 2 hours and 20 minutes. But all the scenes, after cutting those particular scenes, then it's 2 hours and 2 minutes. Yes, if De Palma wanted to, he could have had all 2 hours and 20 minutes. He said, I don't have a problem with a 2 hour and 20 minute movie. I've made a couple movies that way, and it's true. Scarface, Carlito's Way, those are pretty long movies. But if you'll notice, Brian De Palma otherwise makes pretty short or reasonably, with reasonable runtimes. I think his average runtime for a Brian De Palma film is an hour and 45 minutes or something like that. So you compare that to his peers, right? Spielberg or Coppola or Scorsese, and they're quite short compared to those guys. But yeah, so he edited it down to 2 hours and 2 minutes, and I'm not sure what those other scenes could add. Any scenes that they shot that he could put back in and would be a director's cut, I think it would be about, at the most, 2 hours and 10 minutes or 2 hours and 15. Remember, some scenes they didn't even shoot to begin with. So, and finally, the Mark Isham interview, also from the same website, so I can't get back to it, but that's a pretty simple interview. When they talked about runtime, they asked him, did you score a longer movie? And he said no. The movie I scored was basically the movie that you saw in theaters. No longer than that. He never saw a 3 hour version. He never scored a 3 hour version. He speculated that maybe De Palma, and the producers talked about a 3 hour version, but I think he's just speculating. He doesn't know. He doesn't know that. In fact, I think they might have hired him to score the movie long after any discussions were made about runtime or anything like that. Remember, Brian De Palma was really holding out for James Horner to try to score the film, but I think Horner died in a plane crash around that time, so it ended up not happening. But Mark Isham, a fine score, but he confirms he never saw anything close to a 3 hour version. So, hey, this is straight from the horse's mouth. De Palma and Isham, they would know. And so I get it. The idea of a 3 hour version of Brian De Palma's The Black Dahlia, based on a James Elroy novel, sounds enticing. Sounds like maybe it'll be better than what you saw. It's just not true. It is not true. And it's my belief, because this is what happened to me. This is what happened to me. I kept holding on to this idea that there's a 3 hour version, to the point where I wasn't allowing myself to enjoy the 2 hour and 2 minute version that De Palma released. And so when I found out from De Palma and from Isham that there was no 3 hour version, it released me to go back, watch the film, and appreciate it for what it was. And I think the sooner you guys who are holding on to this belief, I think the sooner you let go of that belief, the better. And the more you can, the sooner you can finally enjoy the film that Brian De Palma wanted to show you. It is my belief. I don't know if the film itself is a masterpiece, But I have said, I think it's a masterpiece of directing from Brian De Palma. Because any issues that there are with the film, I think are just issues with the story itself. Like, it can be very confusing. It's very dense. Lots of names of people being thrown around, and you're like, who's that again? Wait, who's that? And, you know, and sometimes it's meant to be confusing because the character Bucky is just as confused as we are at times. So, but yeah, allow yourself to enjoy this movie. Forget about this idea of a 3-hour runtime because I'm telling you, it doesn't exist.